Does that sound all right? Like you're feeling
Yeah,
ready to rock?
got it.
Kat, I have actually no idea how to say your last name though. I just went to introduce you and my brain was like, it's a long one.
The W is a V.
Oh,
Niewiadomska.
Kat Niewiadomska.
Yeah,
Oh wow. Welcome to the podcast, Kat. It's
great.
been 4 years in the making.
I
6.
know. Something like that.
This is the
I'm
best.
excited to be here.
We just as backstory to those listening, we met on a retreat in Bali in 2016.
16.
Whew, how different life was then. But for those listening, who are you, Kat? How do you describe yourself? What do you love? What are you passionate about? Like,
Oh boy. Uh,
we should start with one of those, but like, who are you?
I know. Good question. Um, I'm a lover of people and an adventurer and an explorer of life. But professionally, I'm an executive coach. And in my personal life, I'm the most committed mom ever. And for me, myself, I'm an artist and a writer. Yeah, that's how I present myself.
Yeah, I remember talking to you at that retreat and realizing that your brain works similarly to mine, which I remember we bonded over that it felt rare to meet like a scientist slash artist person
Yep,
combined. Like the war in me recognized the war in you, so to speak. Does
exactly.
that make
Like
sense?
you're getting a PhD. What? I have a PhD. You're writing a book. What? I wrote a book. Like we kind of had those moments of you're
Yeah.
creative. What? I'm creative.
Yeah, that was fun. But so, okay, so you were talking before we pushed the button to record, you were talking about the various altitudes of well-being. And I said, hang on, I'm writing that down and we need to talk about that immediately. So, is that an adequate place to dive into? Like,
Yes, yes, yes. So I said I'm a explorer of life, and the thing that has captured my attention at the moment is the whole idea of mind-body medicine and well-being. I've always been into physical fitness, and then at some point when life kicks you in the teeth, or kicked me in the teeth, I got into therapy and mental fitness and well-being, and of course, as a coach all of the work that we do is around social, emotional, meaning, purpose, all of that stuff. But it's so hard to make sense of it. And of course, as a scientist, I like to make things easier. I like to make things understandable. And so, um, mind body well-being is right now the thing that has captured the most of my attention because it feels like the thing we all need if we're able to go beyond the surface understanding of it, which is fixing the physical part of things. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go to the spa and relax my mind. I'm going to, eat well and exercise, and that's going to be good for my body. But there's so many, that's like just the surface layer. And there are so many more altitudes beyond that that are actually the mind body well being, right?
I, say more, say more. So, it sounds like what you're saying is, yeah, therapy's great, coaching's great, meditation's great, do some yoga, eat some broccoli, but that's like the bare minimum for maintenance of a being. And the kind of higher, more advanced levels are existential,
Yeah.
spiritual.
So let me backtrack a little bit to how I got here. I do leadership development, and I have a background, a PhD in environmental science and engineering, and so a lot of my approach to things is scientific. And a lot of the populations I work with as a coach are scientists, engineers. So I'm doing leadership development for a room full of cardiologists, average age 55, 60. And the topic is well-being in mid-career. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm a 44-year-old woman. What can I walk into this room and tell these people? um, Conveniently, one of the most recent articles that was published around cardiologists is that their mental health and their physical health is one of the worst among all populations, not just medical populations. Yeah, not just medical professionals, but
Cardiologists, people that study the heart, are
yeah,
renowned for having the worst physical health in the industry.
mental and physical, like that, like they have higher rates of stress, they have higher incidences of poor health, all kinds of things, mental breakdown, and a lot of this is self-reported that they're not doing well mentally. The trauma they have to go through on a regular basis of seeing people, the compassion fatigue, that's just part of it. There's also, I've worked with some of these people. They wake up at 4 a.m, they start doing their science and research and literature, the scientific and educational side of their job. Then they see their family for a little bit, then they rush to the clinic. They're in clinic all day doing crazy medical stuff that is beyond you and me. And then they rush home, they spend an hour with their family, and then they're back to looking at data or doing work or researching. They get nothing in sleep, and they volunteer to all these committees. I mean, the idea of work-life balance for them is a joke. Scheduling an hour call with them is near impossible. So back to my story, I walk into the room and I'm like, what can I say of value to people who know it all but have a hard time living it, right? And this is where I landed on this idea of stress over time and how it fatigues your body as the first frontier, right? Like intermittent daily stress, it fatigues you physiologically. But over time, as we saw through COVID, you have the stress that is just consistent, but in a periodic way, like COVID was 2 years, that affects you socially and emotionally. Our social emotional well-being is impaired, right? Like we saw so much more loneliness, and we saw so much more mental illness, and we saw so much hardship through COVID. And then think about this long term again, like think about this as mid-career or midlife. When you've been under stress all your life, the crisis becomes existential. It's no longer physiological or social emotional, right? It becomes an existential crisis of what am I doing anyway? And so a lot of the research I did before this session was these doctors who are like, is my job, like, what is the point of my work? Yeah, I'm saving people, but so what? Like it gets to a point where the crisis becomes existential.
Yeah, so the chronic stress continues and climaxes in some kind of existential crisis where you're questioning your life, your purpose, your identity, yourself. It's like I've heard this time and time again on the podcast of people having this successful career. It's so cliche. I had the big money, I had the big job, I had the family, and yet I was miserable. I was on antidepressants. I wasn't sleeping. I was suicidal, etc. And so this, I think, is what you're describing here. These
100%.
very successful humans are having existential crises, even though on paper they are at the pinnacle of their professional and personal lives.
Absolutely. And not just them, a lot of us, a lot of non-clinicians go through the same thing. Like I think we, to talk about the healing side, when we want to heal, we address the first frontier, which is the physiological one, right? We start to meditate and we eat better and we go to the gym, and that doesn't go the full depth of the healing, because the full depth is social, emotional, and then the existential as well.
So you go to give a talk to a bunch of high-powered, stressed out cardiologists about how to resolve their existential crises.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the crux of it?
That's pretty much it.
And so you get up on stage or behind the mic and you start telling them what? Like, how do you begin?
I know it was very uncomfortable, but I pushed through. The first thing was I had to first make them aware that there is something that they don't know, right? That's how you have to start before you can get anybody's attention, especially as a 44-year-old woman trying to get the attention of older, mostly white males who have lots of letters after their names. I bought these little biodots from Amazon. You'd love this, Jeremy. They measure temperature in your extremities, and they're highly sensitive to small fluctuations in temperature. And so if you're stressed out, your body takes all the blood away from your extremities and sends it to the parts of your body that need it much more to respond to fight or flight, right? That's what our stress does. It helps us respond to fight or flight. To fight or fly, you need to have a great supply of blood to your heart, your large muscles, and your core. So your fingertips get cold. So all the cardiologists get biodots for their fingertips, and they're sitting there, and if the color is black, you're stressed. If the color is amber, you're okay. If the color is green or blue, you're doing fine. And if the color is violet, you're calm. And so I'm walking around the room and I'm like, who in here is stressed? And they're sitting there, they get poured a glass of wine because it's an evening session. And nobody raises their hand, not one person. And I'm like, what color is your biodot? And all of them, their biodot is black, highly stressed. So that was the first thing. I'm like, guys, you're stressed. They're like, but we don't feel stressed. I'm like, exactly, because your nervous system is beyond the point where it's able to recover properly. And you're living somewhere else. You're in your mind, you're at the clinic, you're in your research. You don't even realize that your body is under stress. So that was the first step.
Yeah, it's funny because just this morning I wrote a post, or I'm writing a post about the idea that I didn't realize how sick I was until I got the medicine I needed. And so I think for a lot of us, we don't even realize that we're stressed until we deeply understand or experience what it means to be calm and present. Yeah. And for many of us, we actually don't have a visceral experiential moment where it's like, oh, this. And so we associate a high level of stress with being a low level of stress because of the extreme that we operate under normally. Is that what you're suggesting?
100%. I mean, I'm studying to be faculty with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, so I've been doing a lot of work in that space. And what I'm learning is that our nervous system is like a spring, right? It sustains the stress and then it bounces back. It sustains the stress and then it bounces back. But over time, or when we are under too much stress, it's like you're overstretching a spring. It stops bouncing back to its full capacity. So it goes back halfway and then less and then less. And so we end up being under chronic stress, but we have adapted to it because that's the nature of the human body. Like it seeks balance. And so we adapt to greater and greater and greater levels of stress without having the awareness that our body's falling apart under this huge stress.
And so how do you cultivate an awareness of stress if your system is telling you, we're good? Like, I'm not stressed. I guess maybe that's the next part of your talk.
That's a good question. And my answer is you don't. You cultivate an awareness of calm.
Ooh, that's a good answer.
Right? To create that difference. Like everything is relative. We only experience things in relation to other things. And so the only way to make your nervous system recognize, have that awareness that I'm stressed, is to create the difference of what calm feels like. And so I'm in this room and I get everybody to close their eyes and we do a meditation. That was the first step. And then I talk because it was both well-being and emotional intelligence. But then part of the activity, because again, our physiology is the gateway into the other things. Part of the activity to help create that feeling of calm and release is shaking and dancing. That's one of the things that relieve stress, right? So, and this was monumentally difficult for me to do live in a room in the setting that I described, but I got everybody to stand up and I played Meghan Trainor, Better When I'm Dancing. And I had everybody dancing to this tune. or moving or shaking. And to their credit, they all did. Nobody stayed sitting down. And everybody was dancing and shaking, and they felt so good. And suddenly the, polite face facade fell off, and everybody was smiling. And then the younger guys were like, oh my God, that's my director, and he's dancing. Like, everybody started like, my dot's changing color, my dot's changing color. And just by fact of creating that difference, they all realized that they actually were incredibly stressed, but unaware of it.
That's a hilarious presentation.
It was funny.
I could see going into that room and like, I'm gonna put a bunch of dots on their fingers. I'm gonna make them dance, and
on the fingers of senior cardiologists.
Yeah, it's clever. And then what was the kind of take-home message that you attempted to drive into their souls? Is it like, hey, guys, gals, everybody, you got to remember?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did explain the framework of, our system gets stressed over time. There's a physiological, social, emotional, and eventually existential. And then the way we heal from that is the several altitudes. But then the take home is very simple. The take home is just two things. Awareness. You have to be aware of where you are, what's missing, what you need, how things are going. And then choice, right? We have a choice in all of these things. And it's just a matter of making it. But you can't make a choice if you're not aware of where you are. And so that night, everybody became aware of just how stressed they are. And that, yes, maybe the glass of wine is going to fix it that night, but it's not going to fix it long term. It's not going to answer the question of, what is the meaning of my life? And am I actually going to regret not answering that question the day that I'm going to be dying?
Oh, so you got deep with them.
Yes, I did.
And what was the response like? Because these are people that deal with death every day, right?
Yes, but they deal with the death of others, and they deal with their own inability to save people. They deal with saving people and preventing death. They're so busy focusing on the external, getting things done, filling out medical records, medical charts, sorting out insurance. They don't have a millisecond to think about themselves. They don't have the time to turn inwards and recognize, hey, I am stressed, or hey, this career was fulfilling 10 years ago, but right now I need something else that's going to be more fulfilling. And one thing that I've come to realize is things change over time, in that something that made me happy 2-3 years ago isn't necessarily going to be the same thing that makes me happy. And so it's a cyclical, where am I? What choice am I going to make? Where am I now? What choice am I going to make? Every few seconds, our awareness of who we are and what we want and the things we get from the situations we're in evolves. And if we're not asking ourselves these questions continuously, we stop evolving, right? Like, I have a successful career, things are going well, I have my family. We try to maintain the same thing instead of pushing ourselves to ask the question of, where am I now? Right? Like, I'm fine, but no, I'm answering, I'm fine from a year ago, 2 years ago. And I can share that in my own relationship, I'm recently divorced. In my own relationship, that was the situation for a long time. I got used to telling myself I'm fine. And I kept saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, even though I wasn't fine, because I wasn't really slowing down long enough to be like, oh, where am I now? I was just answering as a reflex that I'm fine from a few years ago.
Yeah, it seems like a very standard thing that we need to hit rock bottom or crises or emergency before we stop and pause and reflect on where we're at. And I know, speaking to you, I think a week or two ago, you were having physical symptoms. You were having very noticeable changes, and that, it sounds like, was the impetus to finally stop and make some changes.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but I did the same thing that I'm preaching against right now, which is I just looked at the physiological, right? I was like, oh, I'm developing an allergy. Oh, it's stomach. Oh, it's leaky gut. Oh, it's, autoimmune, digestive, something. But I didn't dig further. I wasn't like, well, what does that actually mean in the context of my life the way it is right now? And until I started doing that, I was like, oh my God, I'm monumentally unhappy. And I didn't realize it because I was busy just adjusting incrementally to the changes, adjusting incrementally to the changes, being like, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. Until I realized just how not okay I was.
Yeah, it's that classic boil the frog analogy, right?
Yep.
If you slowly turn the water up, the frog won't escape and it won't notice that it's cooking.
Yep.
Was there a moment for you where the epiphany landed, or was it an intentional go away and really consider how this is going? Or
Um, I journal a lot. I've been journaling since I was 14. And um, in my more recent journaling, I've kind of felt like a whiny little, you know, shadow of myself. My journal entries were whiny and they used to be very positive and uplifting and creative. And I think that was the first hint for me that I'm somebody I don't recognize.
mm,
And went back and looked at some older journal entries, and I was like, oh, I was a very different person. I had all these ambitions and things I wanted to do. And now my journaling was like, yep, things are still not good.
another week of suck.
Yep.
Like things haven't changed. Yeah.
It's, so much of what's out there is cliche, but it's cliche based on so much truth, the whole surviving versus thriving. The thriving, it's very hard to define that moment that you go from thriving to surviving. You can't define it except in retrospect. Like in the moment, you can't define it. And so I think another part of the healing is having people around you that you love and trust, who can help reflect a little bit of where you are, what they're seeing in you now versus what they saw in you a week, a month, a year ago.
Do you have friends that were intervening and offering ideas and outside perspectives on your own life?
Um, well, I've moved around a lot, so the answer to that is no. But I have kids who respond very differently to a stressed out parent than to a
Mm.
happy, relaxed parent. And the crappy thing about kids, and I'm sorry for saying crappy, is that the more stressed out you are as a parent, the brattier they behave. And the calmer and more relaxed and more zen you are as a parent, they just pick it up. It's like in the air, like stress waves.
Mm.
And the calmer you are, the better behaved they are and the more awesome they are. And it got to a point where I was like, oh my God, my kids are just, shitheads.
Killers. My kids are shitheads.
And I was like, that's not right. Like, they're kids. Something's not right in that judgment. And I was like, oh no, I'm the shithead. And that was my moment of awareness. I'm like, oh, I'm just like giving my kids all of these stressed out as heck parent vibes.
Mm.
And they're just feeding off of it.
Yeah,
Something's change.
something had to change. You reminded me years ago. I think I've told this story on this podcast, but I took a journal down to the beach and I was going through a breakup and there was infidelity and it was a really hard time in my life. And I just wrote in my journal, hearts change their minds. And I was talking more about my partner leaving and, it wasn't working out any longer and I was no longer the, the first choice or whatever. But then later, like a year later or something, I was reflecting on that. Like, oh, that fits for me too. My old dreams are no longer my current dreams, and my ambitions and desires are no longer what they used to be. And this idea that hearts change their minds struck me as a kind of profound truth that I should probably pay more attention to from my own individual perspective. Like, oh, my heart's sad and gloomy and is thinking lots of different things. And to your point about the thinking being expressed on a journaling page, and you've got data and evidence from before that you can look back to of like, my heart used to be much more vibrant and open and excited. And so after you had those sort of epiphanies about your shithead kids, I'm
going to regret this for the rest of my
no,
life.
I'm going to just use it for another half hour or so, and then we'll forget about it. But I mean, that's a profound realization, right? Because I know that you're a very loving mother and you take it seriously, and you're also a very high achiever. And so I imagine that was what my mom calls a come to Jesus moment of like, okay, can't ignore this anymore.
Yeah, 100%. That's where I was like, okay, I need to get help. I need to get those people who can reflect to me where I am. I need to get, um, little tangents. As a smart person and somebody with a PhD, I've always walked with this idea that I can figure anything out. I'm smart. I don't need help. And I see you nodding. And that was the first step for me of growth, where I was like, okay, I need to eat a very big slice of humble pie. I need to find somebody who can help me get out of here, because I just didn't know how to get out. I was very good at adapting to the status quo, but I wasn't very good at getting out. And that's when I just changed everything. I started reaching out to friends. I started sharing where I was, asking for help, asking for nothing but support. Like I would just call friends and be like, I just need you to hear me complain, because the epiphany is going to come to me, but I just need you to listen. And some friends did go beyond that. They listened, they commiserated with me, they yelled with me. I'm very lucky to have so many amazing friends in the world, but I also hired a coach. I saw a therapist. I joined a trauma healing group. Like there's so much work that I did that was addressing my blind spots before anything else. My biggest blind spot is I don't need help, right? Like I went counter that in every way I could to find all the types of help that could possibly get me out of where I was. Because when you're so like when you're in a hole, what is the natural thing to do from a mechanical perspective? You try to get out. You find the ladder to climb up. You can't. You ask somebody to throw a rope down. You can't. But you need to build yourself up, right? Like you need to gain height, gain perspective. And the way I did that metaphorically is by surrounding myself with people who were loving and constructive and who could give me the tools that I needed to heal. And part of that toolkit is the mind-body medicine skills, which are the trauma healing skills on a physiological level, but also if you extend them on a socio-emotional and existential level.
Can you say more about the extension of the social, emotional, existential levels? Like how do you begin to, maybe perhaps a more specific question? I picture someone listening saying, that sounds great. I would love to expand socially, emotionally, and existentially. What does that mean? Where do I begin? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of the work that we do as coaches is that it's the social emotional element of things. It's helping people to figure out the purpose in life, figure out their place in life, figure out what is meaningful to them, what their values are. How do you live in alignment with your values, right? Like we call it congruence. How do you think, speak, and act in a way that's aligned with your values? Because when you do, then you feel really good. You feel happy. The level of stress in your life doesn't impact you as much, and you can recover much better because you are in alignment. Like if you think about Jenga, when the Jenga bricks are like all over the place, it's very easy to put a tiny little weight on top and it all topples over. But if all those pieces are properly aligned, you put a weight on top and nothing happens. And that's pretty much how we are. If you align your values with your healthy physique, with your sense of purpose, with what you do, with how you do it, with what you say and who you say it to, that's where you're really rock solid. You know, I was just talking to an old friend from college. We knew each other 25 years ago, and he's like, yeah, we were talking about suits. dressing up and going to work. And I said, I hate wearing a suit. I feel like such an imposter. And he's like, yeah, but in your capacity now as an executive coach working with these high level people, you have to do that, don't you? And I was like, no, in the last 2 years, I've made a commitment to myself to be congruent, to be aligned with what I say, what I do, what I believe. And I hate wearing suits. I don't want to walk into a room full of people and tell them that you need to be authentic. And I'm feeling like an imposter because I'm wearing a suit. Just the disconnect is too big for me. And so I'll wear dress pants, but I'll wear them with Converse, right? And I'll walk in there and I'll be like, you need to be aligned with who you are. And this is why I'm wearing Converse.
Mm. Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with a speaking agency a couple years ago about me potentially having them represent me and book me corporate gigs and whatnot. And the very first thing that the man said was, you said fuck in your TED talk, right? And this is before it was like, hi, my name is John. This was like, hi, how are you? It was literally, he led with that. And immediately I just felt in my whole body this sort of feeling like, first, obviously I knew what I said because I said it. And second, like, fuck you, guy. Like, you're not going to tell me how to use my voice. And he said, if you're going to give talks and you're going to do this, you can't talk like that. You can't use profanity. You can't curse. And I took that on board years before that conversation with him. And I really did try to muzzle myself, essentially. And it was so difficult and it didn't work because it wasn't my actual unique voice. And I think that I hear you saying something similar, which is you need to express yourself, be in integrity, your values and your actions are aligned, your life is in congruence with who you want to be, etc. That seems to me like the work of a lifetime, like a perpetual work in progress.
Yeah. And that's what's so beautiful about it. You don't get to an end, you continue to expand, you know?
Yeah, I love the framing of it as beautiful because I myself have occasionally whined like a little shithead. Like, oh man, it's just never ending, isn't it? There's just always something else.
Let me ask you a question. What was your reaction to this guy? Did you continue pursuing the speaking or did you not?
I did. There's like a backstory, but he was like not the main guy in charge. He was kind of a hired gun to help with the intake, and he was a bit of an older man, so there was a generational thing there too. Um, but it definitely was one of those moments, because I have done a lot of work around this, like where I did pause and checked in, and I was aware of the sensations in my system. It's like, hang on, I need to consider this. And even I remember I refused to sign the contract on the call. There was like some kind of other thing where I'm like, no, I need time to think about this. And so I gave myself that out to kind of.
I think when these things like confront us, we sometimes make a judgment on the spot that like corporate speaking is not for me, or business coaching is not for me, which is a judgment I had made about myself for a while. And it took me some evolution and maturing to realize that it's not this one blanket yes or no, right? Some corporate spots are not for me, some business coaching is not for me, but some of it is. And it's just a matter of continuing to remind ourselves that there's always room for us as we are out there. It's just that we have to not cancel out that part of the world where we have to tiptoe a little bit more, or where we have to walk with a little bit more courage, right? Like, so me being in that room with doctors, nobody judged me for what I was wearing. Nobody judged me for making a bunch of doctors dance, but I was judging myself the whole time. I was like, oh, maybe I should just cancel this whole part of the talk. And that was the part of the talk that transformed them. But there was a lot of internal cheerleading between me and myself. I was like, don't cancel it. You can do this. You're here to do this. Like, I had to do a lot of that internal building up to follow through with it. But it was hard because there were 20 faces looking at me and being like, you want us to what? Excuse me?
Yeah, it's refreshing always to hear people share their own self-talk and their own fears, because on the page, right, you are a wildly successful university professor, TED talker. And I laughed earlier when you said, "Oh, they have a bunch of letters behind their name." I was like, "Come on, yeah, like you've
More than
got
I
you've got a couple yourself." And this to me is also one of those examples of what we were saying a moment ago of, oh man, it just doesn't end, does it? What a beautiful time to expand into confidence and acceptance. And like, wow, you're talking to people about the thing that you need to practice yourself.
Yeah, it's only beautiful in retrospect. I mean, there is that caveat. It's like, I'm so glad I ran that 10K, but when you're running the 10K, you're like, I hate my life.
Mm, yeah. Isn't this a beautiful time to expand my muscles?
Mhm.
Is there a specific existential crisis that you're having at the moment, or an edge that you're walking currently?
I love that you ask these questions. I need to get on a podcast with you like quarterly so I can do this like evaluation of life.
I do like, I have said this, I think, to many guests of just, and it's usually at the end of, what's your edge at the moment? What are you working on? What are you leaning into? What's something that is creating a bit of friction in your heart and soul? Because again, selfishly, I just find it refreshing.
Oh, for sure. And I'm very straightforward with all these things, but I'll tell you where I am now. Um, Motherhood is a curveball, and I am 12 years into it. I have a 12, 11, and 8-year-olds. And maybe I'll expand it to parenting, making assumptions about fatherhood, because I can't speak from first hand experience. But when you have a child, so much of your life changes without you inviting that change. Something happens, it's instinctual, it's visceral, it's DNA, I don't know. But for me personally, there was a split between me as I've always known myself and me as a mom. And suddenly I wanted to, do everything I could for my kids, make them happy and please them and feed them well and dedicate every waking second I had to them. And I was very conscious that I need to maintain my life and my hobbies and my this and my that. But just like we were saying, little by little, that person, that cat who was the pre-kid cat, disappeared and compromised and evolved and gave more to the kids and to the relationship and to the family and to the moving and to this and to that, until I got to a point where I disappeared. And that was probably rock bottom, because it all happens together, right? Like life happens that way. So I moved, I bought a house, I got a divorce, I started my own business. I decided really to live in full alignment. But the process of rebuilding now, refinding who I was, is I guess it's just as long a road as it is to lose yourself, because you're not just finding the pieces of yourself as you were, you're restructuring them. Like, do I still want to be that person from 10 years ago? I don't. But do I still love learning? I do. Do I still want to learn the same things? I don't. Do I want to learn new things? I do. What are those new things? So there's a whole process of recreating myself and recreating how I parent and trying to integrate these two people back into one. Like, I'm trying to reintegrate a new version of myself and the mom self into one cohesive, congruent, to use the word we were using earlier, version of me that doesn't feel split. And it's hard work. And I'm not always successful.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had a conversation with a woman called Tiffany Berkowitz on the podcast, and it's a really good chat to those listening if you want to check that one out. But she grew up in a very evangelical, hardcore religious upbringing, and around 20 decided to leave the church. And I remember her saying something like, I didn't know what I believed about how the world worked. And it wasn't even just that she didn't know herself, she didn't know what she thought. She didn't know what she believed about others. And so she had to confront this kind of existential terror of, I have no foundation under me and I need to build that while I'm falling/floating through life. And I think to your point, it's like this beautiful invitation, but it's also this really horrific, scary, challenging thing. That's not easy, right?
It's not. And I think as we grow, we start looking at different tools that, or different resources, maybe tools is not the right word, different resources and different sources of support to help us. And, for me, I've always been opposed to religion as an organized thing because I went to Catholic school. I grew up in Lebanon where, religion was the source of all conflict around us. But in this transition of mine, or in my growth or expansion, I've come back to spirituality from a different perspective, from a source of strength and a source of energy and knowledge and wisdom, rather than the way I was taught about religion. So that's something new for me. Another new thing I've picked up along the way is this concept of community, where as an intellectual, I was always like, I'm smart, I could figure it out. And now I'm like, no, the community around me that is so beautiful. And there's so much give and take in this, expansion of a community, that I really am starting to invest in creating a local community here. And, all the things that I've learned, I've moved into wanting to teach these things as well, because the whole idea of congruence is not just vertical, it's also horizontal, right? Like it has to apply to all the different areas of your life. When you're congruent, it's not just at work. It's not just how you show up professionally. It's how you show up in your relationship. It's how you show up as a parent. It's how you show up as a friend. It's how you show up in your community. And that for me is like a big shift of starting to see things in a much more systems, holistic way, rather than in my little bubble of cat, the world of cat.
Yeah, it's like an inventory audit of the
Yeah.
various pieces and parts of your life.
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like we spend different phases of our life building little pieces. Like we spend time building a career, and then spend time building a family, and spend time building our beliefs around spirituality or whatever it is. But at some point, we have to spend time integrating all of these things so that we continue to have a fairly smooth ride, and integration also means sometimes throwing out old beliefs or old structures or relationships or ideas that no longer serve us, or dreams even. A big part of the work I realized I needed to do before I was able to move forward is to recognize that I had unarticulated dreams that would never ever come true. And that's part of the existential crisis as well. Like, I am never going to, now that I'm divorced, I am never going to be getting old with the person that I married, right? Or at least the father of my children. That's a dream that's gone.
Yeah. Like getting old in the context of a marriage. Like you will be getting old together in theory. But I hear your point, right? You have to the end of a relationship is also the end of the fantasy that you were creating about what that relationship is.
Yeah, and I think the hard part is not that. The hard part is recognizing that you're creating a fantasy, because it was never a fantasy of mine. Like, I never articulated it, I never thought it, I didn't know it was there. And so when we talk about therapy, when we talk about, having these, I recently read about talking circles. Have you heard of talking circles?
I don't think so.
Again. So in my research for this talk, I discovered talking circles, and these are an old indigenous form of therapy. Like, the indigenous people used to sit down in a circle and they would pass around the talking stick, and each person would speak. They would just share what's on their mind, what's in their hearts, and there would be no judgment, and nobody's allowed to give advice or to judge or to fix. But when you're done speaking, you pass on the stick, and the other person speaks about what they're feeling, what's in their minds and their hearts. And in recent times, they're actually testing talking circles out in hospitals with nurses and clinicians, and they found that it lowers their stress level and it increases their sense of self-awareness and well-being. And so I forgot why I got onto this topic. What was I saying before?
We were talking about the end of the fantasy and you not realizing
And
it
the
was even.
fantasy, yes, talking in therapy, talking circles. So the value of talking is to help bring up some of these um, fantasies or dreams that are in your subconscious that you don't know they're there. And so having this community, this group of people where you can just honestly share what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and have somebody be like, oh. Or hearing somebody else talk about the death of a dream makes you start reflecting. So the talk is such a fundamental part of the healing as well.
Yeah. And I think it's not widely discussed enough that this idea of bettering your life can make you feel worse, because bettering your life and making changes requires grieving a lot of these things that you might not even realize you're holding. Even
Yeah.
if you leave a toxic relationship, it's still the end of a relationship, and you have to grieve that loss while also simultaneously stepping towards this better, more aligned, more congruent place. It's not
Yeah.
all rainbows and sunshines and unicorn puppies.
Unicorn puppies, that's cute.
I don't know. Puppy
um
corns?
puppy corns.
What do you call a baby unicorn anyway?
I don't know.
Is there like a noun, a collective noun?
Unicorn.
Yeah, like a baby dog is a puppy and a baby cat is a kitten and a piglet. See, this is what happens when you talk to me. We talk about like deep stuff, and it's like, hang on, Kat, you're a PhD. I have a question.
I'm gonna have to ask my daughter.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm stumped.
Anyway, uh, how do we get back on track now? We've made
Um,
it, to be fair, 46 minutes of being relatively on track. That might be a record.
I am pretty my brain works on a railroad. But
What does that mean on a railroad?
one track minded.
Oh, gotcha.
Although a railroad is two tracks technically. Damn it.
We could have done to you. Is there because you work with a lot of people, you work with a lot of clients and corporations in that context, is there a specific thing that you see over and over again that surprises you, or that you want to just shake the whole world and wish that they realized?
Yeah. Everybody has the same problems. No, seriously, I walk into some of these meetings and I'm like, whoa, this guy, he's the director of engineering, or this is a VP of this and this. And I build them up in my mind and I feel a little intimidated. And then we start talking and it's the same, how do I manage my family and my job? How do I reduce the stress? I'm feeling burnt out. Life is hard. I'm feeling a sense of meaninglessness in what I do. It's all the same. And the underlying pain that everybody is carrying is the same. Wherever they are, whatever their position, whatever their gender, it's walking in with this, like we all have the same pain and we're all here to kind of ease our pain is something that I am always surprised by, especially because I tend to get intimidated by some of these things, or my self-talk intimidates me that they have a bigger title or they have a big office, or the company is huge, but in the end there's a human with pain in their heart sitting in front of you. And it's just, the question is not, do they have pain? Are they the same as me? The question is, what is the best pathway to ease their pain? Because there are different pathways, right? Some people are very cerebral, some people are very emotional, some people are, and it's finding those pathways. And I think that's one of the things I love most about being a coach, is that it's incredibly human, heart-centered work, but it's also incredibly cerebral, intellectual, problem-solving, creative problem-solving work too,
Yeah, 100%. The client interaction, I compared it the other day to like a boxing match. Like maybe as the coach, you throw a question out like a jab, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, they dodged that one. Okay. Let me try the hook. Like, oh, they dodged that one too. Let me try the jab again, but a little bit different, a little quicker. And then suddenly it lands, and you're like, okay. And it's this ongoing kind of riddle slash puzzle slash back and forth. And it does very much feel gamified. right? And you have your toolkit as a coach, and you're like, okay, how do I crack them? How do I get in there? How do I make them have an epiphany? Yeah.
100%. And then sometimes it's, you think you need to go in with the jab and you end up in a hug. And
Yeah.
that's what cracks them open. Like, of all things, you're like, okay, I give up. Let me just give you a hug and say goodbye. And they just,
Mhm. Yeah. But I remember last year, a friend and I were presenting. We got invited in to present to this sales company, and it was like 50 sales executives, 98% men. And we were preparing for this full day event to bond them and unite them and make the organization more wholehearted, etc. And my buddy was a little nervous, and I was a little nervous too. But then I told him, "Hey, it's just a bunch of people. Like, it's just a bunch of humans, and yeah, they got titles and money and corporate whatever, but it's just a bunch of humans." And within 10 minutes of the intro circle, people were crying, and we kind of looked at each other and kind of like cracked our knuckles, like, "Oh yeah, we got this now." But your share is a nice reminder of that, and I think we forget that at our peril, individually and collectively as a society.
absolutely. And the work we do, I mean, it does require people to trust us, right? Like the work we do requires people to feel safe around us. And if you're able to build that trust and credibility in the beginning, everything else is the same. But it's how do you build that trust and credibility with people so that they feel safe in your presence and safe enough to share their vulnerabilities, or safe enough to stop being on guard by looking outwards and then look inwards to start being like, okay, where am I now?
How do you do it?
Who's your audience? Each audience has a different approach. And maybe this is one of the reasons why I love being a jack of all trades, because I can go to a group of artists and be like, I'm an artist. And I go into a group of engineers and be like, I'm an engineer. And I go into a group of doctors and be like, I'm a scientist. There's a little part of us that we can call on to identify with each person. And so depending on what they think is valuable and what they think matters, people just want to feel like you have the potential to understand them and to provide them with support. So if you have that capability, you can connect with them and you're able to give them something of value, they'll listen, they'll open up.
Well, I feel like maybe that's a good place to wrap it up. That sound
Yeah,
all right?
yeah.
Is there anything that we've not touched upon that you're like, Jeremy, bro, how could you not ask me this? I
um
prepared for this for an hour.
I was so prepared. No,
Were
I'm
you
just
really? Oh,
No, I'm just kidding. I shuffled my kids out the door 10 minutes before I got on the Zoom.
what did you say? I outsourced
Outsourced.
my children.
Um, no, I just want to say that I'm running a retreat in Costa Rica where I'm teaching a lot of these trauma healing, mind body medicine skills, and on all the altitudes of the physiological, but also the socio-emotional and the existential. And I'm really excited to be doing this. I know your retreats is a thing for you. You've done a whole bunch. We met on a retreat, so I feel like it's only appropriate to throw out the
Yeah.
mind body medicine retreat for burnout recovery.
When is it?
March 31st to April 5th.
Okay. And you and Tony are doing it.
Me and Tony.
Who you guys
Tony.
met on the retreat, right?
We met on one of the retreats. Yeah, we met on the Venice retreat, and then she came again to the Bali one.
Yeah. That's fun. And are you on LinkedIn? Do you have a website? Are you on Instagram? Like, I'll put all this stuff in the show notes to those listening, but I think you have some of those.
Time for Instagram. I'm loosely on Instagram, but I'm definitely on LinkedIn. And I have a website. It's Audacity activated again, because I think it takes a lot of audacity to show up as you are in a world that is trying to shape you the way it wants you to be.
Completely. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was actually my first bullet point of 4 to talk about. and we didn't quite make it to the first bullet
Oh
point, but
man,
I might
all that preparation for nothing.
I might have to have you back. Like, I have one bullet point this time, not four. But yeah, thanks for stopping by, and I just adore and appreciate you and love the work you're doing, and I'm really proud of you for making all those changes. I mean, you rattled them off, but divorce, leaving a job, moving, buying a house, and starting a business, those are big things, and to do them all relatively simultaneously is it's hugely inspiring to me. So well
Thank you.
done. Yeah.
I always find it fascinating talking to you. You always bring up the most awesome questions, and it's never boring having a conversation with you.
Well, you could talk to Kendra about that last claim. I think sometimes it's like, bro, come on. But I received that compliment and right back at you. Yeah, this was a fun one.
Thank you.